For our multivariate presentation, we chose to analyze trust in Colombian governmental institutions. Our pseudonym is landsdowne2012pol242y. So for our question and sample, we used the sample Latino Barometer 2007, country Colombia, coded as 4. Our research seeks to analyze the various factors that can lead to higher levels of trust in Colombian governmental institutions, in particular with regards to present economic conditions, support for democracy, and freedom from, which we recoded into liberty. We did do some background research, and our rationale for going forward is that Colombia is a very interesting country going through periods of development, and we're seeing how these different variables affect trust in governmental institutions, which are very key for development. Taylor in 2011 argues for the importance of elections in Colombia and their role in establishing stable regimes and trustworthy institutions. Albarnez and Duta in 2007 claim that democracy is inextricably linked to further support for government and economic prosperity. San Francisco and Soto claim that liberal capitalist democracies will likely be the most prominent regimes in South America due to liberal Western external pressures and lack of alternatives or failure of other alternatives that have been tried. Lastly, democratic systems tend to also be more resistant to uprisings as they center around political participation and civic involvement by the citizens themselves, so they tend to trust the institutions that govern themselves a little bit more if they are electing them. Our approach is we took three independent variables, x1 as present economic conditions, x2 current state of democracy in the given country, and x3 we created an index to form liberty, which is made up of freedom of political participation, freedom to choose one's occupation, protection of private property, the environment, and freedom of speech everywhere, and freedom of religion. Our dependent variable is trust in government institutions, and we index this using trust in government, the judiciary, the president, and national congress or parliament. We have three hypotheses. H1 is that higher levels of support for the current economy will positively correlate with higher levels of trust in governmental institutions. Second hypothesis is that higher levels of support for democracy, being the most favorable regime, will positively correlate with higher levels of trust in governmental institutions. And finally, those who believe to possess more liberty or freedom from will most likely have stronger levels of trust in governmental institutions as well. We have very strong reliability analysis for our two index. For our dependent variable, we have an alpha of 0.785, and for our indexed x3 independent variable of liberty, we have a high alpha of 0.6934. Our other two independent variables, we recoded them going from 1 to 4 to ensure positive direction. X1 is satisfaction with the way the economy works in the given country, going from not satisfied at all to very satisfied. X2 is confidence in democracy. 1, no confidence, going towards 4, a lot of confidence in the system. We have a correlation matrix where we could see a few results. First of all, we see trust in government is highly correlated with democracy, so therefore it validates one of our initial hypotheses that the more support for democracy, one will most likely be more inclined to trust the government as well. We also see strong relationships between democracy and present economic conditions as well. We also reject the null hypothesis by our p being 0.000. Our regression without any interaction, we see strong beta values of 0.319 for democracy. And then we also note that tolerance is above the 0.7 threshold, so we can therefore exclude multicollinearity. And finally, looking at our adjusted R-squared, we can see that there's 23.6% explained variance in the variables from our model.
For our hierarchical regressions, we decided to choose two models, one where we have without interaction and the other is with interaction. Our two dummy variables, the first one, Z1, was coded as int for interests. It measured to what extent the respondents believe that the government is working for small interest groups or for the whole citizenry. Our second dummy variable was the perceived socioeconomic status of the respondent by the surveyor. This was coded as SOS. Our interaction variable was created by multiplying Z1 and Z2. Our first model without interaction shows that the dummy variables had no effect on the independent variables, which allows us to observe a replication. This demonstrates replication with the new z variable interaction, which shows how the dummy variables did not create any change in the independent variables. For our interpretation, we multiplied the two dummy variables int and soc to create inso, which represents how well interest groups are represented and the socioeconomic status of the respondent, and measured how they affect trust in government. Our conclusion was that socioeconomic status had an effect on one's trust in government. For every one unit standard deviation in poor socioeconomic status, there was a 0.27 unit decrease in trust in government. Therefore, the richer someone was, the more trust they had in the government, and the poorer they were, the less trust they had in government. A standard deviation increase in the amount that people think the government works for the benefit of all shows a 0.15 increase in the trust in government. Therefore, the more the government is perceived as working for the benefit of all, the more they are trusted. The dummies did not affect the independent variables, so we had replication. When we combined int and soc, which were the code names of our two dummy variables, into inso, which was the code name of our interaction, by multiplying them, the beta yield the interaction is negative 0.03, which is too low to see any sort of relationship.
Thank you for watching. These are our sources for our background research, and our syntax will be attached as well.